Manatees swim in long, winding channels that meander out into the Gulf of Mexico. While many animal species of the Everglades are in danger of extinction, unfortunately, the bloodthirsty mosquitoes, of which there are dozens of species, are not. The Everglades is unlike any other ecosystem on the continent. Cajun, Creole, crawdads, and carnival. They all say New Orleans. The city was settled by the French in 1718, and the picturesque French Quarter embodies the original charm of New Orleans. The French Quarter's Creole architecture combines both French and Spanish styles and is noted for its iron lace balconies, pastel wooden shutters, and shady cobbled courtyards. Bordering Jackson Square, the heart of the French Quarter, and adjacent to the Cathedral of St. Louis, are the Cabildo and the Presbytère. They stand as charming examples of wide Spanish arches blending smoothly with French mansard roofs. The Mardi Gras parade is only one of about 50 parades that take place during New Orleans carnival season, but it is certainly the most spectacular. Private clubs called crews hold grand balls, sponsor elaborate floats, and choose kings and queens to toss souvenirs to the crowd from the floats. Maskers in spectacular costumes join the parade in the country's biggest outdoor masquerade. The word Cajun is a corruption of Acadian, the name for the French Canadians exiled from Acadia after the Treaty of Utrecht granted their colony in Nova Scotia to the British in 1713. They settled in the mysterious and isolated Louisiana bayous. Over the centuries, the Cajuns created a distinct culture with its own language, music, and cuisine. Zydeco bands stomp and fiddle infectiously at clan gatherings. Cajun cooking is inextricably bound to the fresh, natural bounty of the bayous. Blackened redfish, jambalaya, and piles of steamed crawdads. Cajuns don't eat. They feast.
Down in this part, people generally get up in the morning. They're happy to be alive. They live life from basically a minute at a time, I guess you could say, and they don't worry about tomorrow till it gets there. So I guess you could say down here we have an old saying, "La vie c'est bon ici." Life is good here. It's just a down-home life. If there's anything that can be said for the Cajun way of life, it's be simple, Don't complicate your life.
Plantations along the Mississippi River north of New Orleans contributed substantially to the city's wealth. Slaves were brought from the Caribbean. Cotton, indigo, and sugar were shipped out to Europe. When business was not being conducted, social life was. The Mississippi River divides the United States geographically and culturally. Snaking 2,552 miles north to south, it is North America's largest and longest river. Accepting the waters of 100 tributaries and the soils of 31 states, it separates the east from the west, the forests from the prairies. Changing course constantly, the broad brown waters weave and curl extravagantly from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico in their leisurely meander to the sea. Mark Twain called it the crookedest river in the world after a 4-year stint as a Mississippi riverboat pilot. From the experience, he took his nom de plume, Mark Twain, which signifies water 2 fathoms deep. Goods flowed both ways up and down the Mississippi between New Orleans and Chicago during the 19th century. With the advent of the railroads, Chicago flourished as the major manufacturing center of the Midwest. Raw materials flowed in and finished products poured out across the country. People to make these products surged into Chicago from the South, bringing their music with them. That was the birth of the blues, specifically the legendary Chicago blues. It is said that one must live the blues before one can sing the blues, and nowhere else is this sentiment expressed better than in Chicago.
Lord, that's what I thought that I heard. I thought I heard my baby say, Junior, listen.
A city rising from the shores of the vast inland seas of the Great Lakes, the Windy City, Chicago, is known for its whirlwinds of political passion, dynamic weather, and stunning innovation. The roaring inferno that was the Great Fire of 1871 nearly leveled the city. Within 2 decades, a new urban architecture was born. Chicago architects invented the skyscraper, and a new skyline rose like a phoenix from the ashes. The 110-story Sears Tower is the tallest building in the world, so tall that from the observation deck it is possible to see the curvature of the earth. At the opposite end of the architectural scale, Frank Lloyd Wright pioneered the low, single-story, prairie-style houses that became the prototype for most of the homes built in 20th century America. Wright's home and adjacent studio in Oak Park are a superb example of his work.
4, 5, 10, 20. Do anything you want. Have a good one. I appreciate it.
Some things are simply unique to Chicago.
What makes Chicago special is Chicago-style hot dogs. The average person here is a connoisseur and an expert. It's not taken lightly. If you would ask the average person a question about a hot dog, they'll talk for 20 minutes.
What do you think? It's a long way. Come on.
A century ago, 90% of Chicago's population were immigrants or first-generation Americans. It's still entirely possible to wander through an ethnic neighborhood and come away thinking you've been in a foreign country. Crossing the Mississippi with all their worldly goods, Pioneers heading west in the mid-1800s considered St. Louis the last bastion of civilization. To honor its role as the gateway to the West, St. Louis erected one of America's most recognizable landmarks in 1965, the Gateway Arch. During the westward movement of the 19th century, the largest flood of human migration in the history of the United States occurred. Thousands flooded out of the east, seeking free farmlands and new fortunes. They bought their provisions, posted their last letters, and followed the wagon ruts out of Missouri to the Oregon and Santa Fe trails. In the 25 years after the Civil War, the settled areas of the country doubled in size. Chimney Rock, Nebraska, stands sentinel as it did then, visible for days before it was finally reached, visible for days after it had been passed. The wagons were loaded so heavily, only the sick or very young could ride. Everyone else walked across the continent, step by weary step. The West encompasses extraordinary wonders and spectacular landscapes. Sweeping prairies, towering mountains, bizarre badlands, and vast sand deserts, colors and shapes that bedazzle and bewitch. Locked in its mountain fastness, Yellowstone National Park is so strange, so wondrous, that the Salish and various other local tribes believed it to be under an enchanted spell. When mountain man John Coulter first told people about Yellowstone in 1807, they thought he must be mad. Scalding water, shooting hundreds of feet into the air, pools of purple, red, and yellow boiling and bubbling, icy water plunging hundreds of feet into the river. Yet Coulter was vindicated because all those natural marvels are part of Yellowstone. The first national park established in the world, Yellowstone is one of the most extraordinary places on the planet. It is an enchanted land, and the animals are no less magical than the scenic wonders of Yellowstone. Bigger than all outdoors, better than any other place could possibly be. That's the Texans' view of Texas. Even American football takes no back seat in Texas.
We gonna win. Okay, we gonna win. I tell you we gonna win. No, we gonna win.
Rich with rustic adobe buildings and old Spanish missions set on the banks of a graceful, curving river, San Antonio was built on the site of a tiny native village in 1718. The village had welcomed its first European guest nearly 120 years before, when the roving Franciscan friar Padre Marcinet, followed the river and stumbled upon the village on the feast day of St. Anthony, and so named the village San Antonio. Shaded by luxuriant cypress, oak, and willow trees, cobbled paths wind their way along the San Antonio River for more than 2 miles of the Paseo del Rio, or River Walk. At the heart of San Antonio is the Mission San Antonio de Valero, best known as the Alamo. Overrun by General Santa Anna's huge Mexican army, both backwoodsman Davy Crockett and mountain man Jim Bowie were among the 189 men who died defending the Alamo in 1836. Austin, El Paso, Houston, Dallas, all are cities that are at the center of countless stories of the Old West. The flat Texas landscape is perforated with modern skyscrapers rising to compete for the sunlight. Cattle and oil have made the fortunes of many Texans. Thousands of head of cattle raised on sprawling ranches are rounded up every year by cowboys and driven hundreds of miles north. Roundups, complete with Stetson-hatted cowboys and chuck wagons, are still very much a part of Texas. And what would a roundup be without the signature cowboy boot? At the Tony Lama factory, craftsmen ply their skills creating works of art in bullhide, ostrich, and snakeskin. Truly a luxury item ranging from $250 to $1,900 a pair. "60% of all the oil and gas wells drilled in the United States are drilled within a 500-mile radius of Houston. Cattle and oil together fueled the massive human migrations that swept over Texas in the 19th and 20th centuries. In this stark, inhospitable land of the Southwest, the Anasazi, whose name means the Ancient Ones, built elaborate dwellings. Some were built into almost inaccessible cliffs. They remain engineering marvels of this age-old agrarian civilization that migrated from the surrounding flatlands some 700 years ago. Archaeologists believe that warfare and possibly the lack of water forced the Anasazi to seek safety and mountain springs high on the cliffs. In the land of the Ancient Ones, only the silent, wind-swept ruins remain. Called the Dancing Ground of the Sun by the Pueblo tribes, the site where Santa Fe now stands is a 7,000-foot high